must say it's quite comfortable being up the front here with these capable leaders, and I feel very safe sitting with them because I know all the questions will be directed to them. To our media partners joining us today, Kia ora, Pula Minaka, and welcome back to Suva for those who were able to make it. And thanks to all of you joining us online. It's so good to see all of you today. The partnership and interest of news organizations is an ongoing aspect of our work in supporting information and outreach for the FEMM to our members. There isn't a ministerial meeting we hold which attracts the level of media interest of the Forum Economic Ministerial Meetings, and is both a credit to the FEMM mandate for achieving the aspirations of Pacific economies and your ongoing interest in reporting the issues that are a priority for the people we serve to secure the future of the blue Pacific continent, our Pacific future. I am especially proud to introduce the chair of the just ended FEMM 2023. His insights, experience and analysis are hands-on and also informed by formidable quality of advice from his team. Thanks to FI Secretary Herman, Finance Secretary Henderson and the team, the Forum Chair has spent the last 2 days shepherding a heavy FEMM agenda through some key discussions to land us at this point today. And I thank, for those of you who are familiar with Prime Minister Brown's approach, you know what to expect. And so without further ado, may I invite Forum Chair, FEMM Chair Prime Minister Brown to present the key highlights of the FEMM 2023. Meta Gimata.
Thank you very much, SG. It is quite a privilege to be talking to you, the media, after we've had 2 days of the Forum Economic Ministers meeting, but to be here in this library of the Forum and have the faces of previous Forum chairs, notable leaders of the Pacific behind us. So it adds a little bit of, I guess, history to this occasion. But let me say that we've just completed and approved our outcomes document, and I have invited Finance Minister and Deputy Prime Minister Prasad, Finance Minister Teo from Tonga, to join me as representatives of our Troika as we look to operationalize the Troika arrangement. For those of you who may not be aware, it is the group of leaders comprising of the current chair of the Forum, the immediate past chair, which was Fiji, and the incoming future chair, which will be Tonga. And it is a mechanism that we are looking at to provide support to the current chair, but also to provide continuity of work and priorities that the Forum has in front of them. So I welcome the input of my two fellow Finance Minister colleagues to this press briefing. Essentially, we were given an economic update of economic performance in the region. In terms of output levels, most countries are projected to reach their pre-pandemic GDP levels by 2024, a good indication of a recovery of economies. There are some of our countries that will still struggle to get to those levels, but the outlook is encouraging with growth around 5%. Inflation is expected to remain a concern for our countries moving forward, as well as management of our debt and debt profiles, as all of our countries have emerged, most of our countries I should say, have emerged from COVID with increased debt. We had the first occasion on the first day to talk to the private sector, the regional private sector representatives, as well as the civil society organisation representatives as well. And I have to say that their contributions were well received. And as finance ministers, the relationship with our private sector is critical. The private sector is the engine of growth across all of our countries, so they play a very critical role for us, as well as the civil society organisations who we recognise for picking up a lot of the work that is not captured under formal government entities, particularly in the areas of addressing vulnerabilities, disabilities, elderly, and so forth. So the important role that both of these sectors play in our countries, we welcome the input and commentary by representatives from the private sector and the CSOs. Maybe I'll just stick to a couple of the issues we did talk about. Correspondent banking relationships are a concern for a couple of our countries, a number of our countries, in terms of banks looking to de-risk their involvement in some of our Pacific countries and moving out of these Pacific countries. The correspondent banking relationships are affected. Banking is an important aspect of financial structures within countries to enable transfer of funds, whether it's through trade, whether it's through remittances, but this has been a concern for a number of our countries, and we welcome Australia and New Zealand's input and support to address some of these concerns, as well as with the World Bank. The Forum Economic Ministers have tasked the Secretariat here to work with the World Bank to prioritise the recommendations and progress the implementation of regional recommendations with the support, as I mentioned, of our relevant development partners, but also in consultation with members through to the next Economic Ministers meeting. We also discussed the climate finance opportunities that are important for Pacific countries, the need for increased climate action to address some of our concerns. And in that regard, we've tasked again the Secretariat and our crop agencies and our partners and member countries to develop a regional climate finance roadmap. A roadmap that will pull together the proliferation of different financing pools for climate finance and to provide a coordinated approach by Pacific countries to be able to better access climate finance. In terms of disaster risk financing and provision for preparing our countries in the event of disasters, we have approved the Pacific Regional Disaster Risk Financing Roadmap and Guidelines for developing national disaster risk financing strategies. We've encouraged all of our member countries to work with the technical working group to support the implementation of a Pacific disaster risk financing roadmap and guideline, again through the development and implementation of each national DRF strategy. One of the highlights I would have to say of our outcomes today is in terms of the Pacific Resilience Facility. This is a facility that was first proposed more than 6 years ago as a means for attracting donor funding or development partner funding into a specific Pacific designed vehicle so that financing can hit the climate priorities of our Pacific countries. We know that in the world that there is a number of avenues for financing climate initiatives, such as the Green Climate Fund and other sources of financing. Pacific countries have, for a number of years, voiced their concerns at the difficulty in accessing climate finance. So what we have done over the last few years, and in particular the last year and 18 months, is redesign this proposal for a Pacific resilience facility that will be targeted to development partners to put their funds into and used for Pacific adaptation measures specifically for Pacific countries. And we see this as one way to enable funds to be freed up quicker to our members in the Pacific countries to address climate and resilience building initiatives, which in many cases can be quite small scale and thereby make it difficult to fund when we do go through the formal channels of the likes of the Green Climate Fund. So we're very pleased that our membership has approved the implementation of the redesigned Pacific Resilience Fund. This will now go to the leaders' meeting in November for formal approval and adoption. We also met with the Pacific Investment Fund, and this is a group of our sovereign wealth funds, provident funds, trusts that have, with a combined pool of over $90 billion worth of members' funds, looking at opportunities where they can use those funds to be invested in Pacific Island countries. Of course, these particular funds would need to be effective for their members, would need to attract a return. So there would be specific types of investment that would suit this particular investment fund, particularly those that do have a revenue stream attached to them. So the presentation was well received by ministers, and we support the investment fund co-investment platform to identify commercially viable infrastructure projects for investment by our provident sovereign wealth and super funds in the Pacific countries. And lastly, for one of the important topics of discussion was the economic implications of labour mobility for many of our countries. Labour mobility has provided an avenue for many of our people in our Pacific Island countries an opportunity to earn income working in Australia or New Zealand, and has provided an opportunity for remittances to be sent back to our countries. We also acknowledged on the flip side of the labour mobility scheme some of the issues and concerns that have been raised, in particular being worker welfare in these countries, to ensure that workers are receiving fair working conditions, to ensure that there are issues around worker exploitation are addressed as well. In addition to that, concerns around the loss of good working capital from our Pacific Island countries taking advantage of the labour scheme, and how these are affecting some of our member countries with the domestic labour force. But in general, the finance ministers reaffirmed the importance of including comprehensive social and economic cross-cutting assessments of the costs, benefits and social impacts of the regional labour schemes in the development of the regional strategy. And I know Minister Prasad also has raised some initiatives that should be considered by members of Pacific Island Forum countries to enable freer movement between our countries, to the extent of recommending or suggesting that we also consider visa-free travel between our countries, because as we know, the movement of labour, the movement of people also facilitates economic growth and economic opportunity for both countries that are providing the labour and also for those countries that are receiving the labour component. I've been talking quite a bit here, fellow ministers. Maybe I will stop here and invite my fellow ministerial colleagues if they would like to add any aspects to the outcomes document that we've just completed. Deputy Prime Minister?
Thank you, Honourable Prime Minister and Chair of the Forum, as well as Chair of the FEMM meeting, Secretary General, my colleague Minister from Tonga. I think this has been, I've attended four economic ministers meeting before in different capacities, but I must say that this was a very, very united, a very considered, very well discussed meeting on a number of issues. Obviously, the Honourable Prime Minister provided excellent leadership in the discussions, and as he has pointed out, some of the key outcomes reflect the region's resolve to address some of the fundamental issues affecting the region, from economic growth to regional integration to climate financing, to an innovative, regional climate resilient facility and fund. And we are very confident that under the chairmanship of the Honourable Prime Minister and the chair of the forum, some of these initiatives will see action and fruition in a very, very short period of time. Obviously, we would like to also say that the region, as stated by the chair, is recovering very well. We are still transitioning from the onslaught of COVID and the economic contraction that many countries in the region suffered. Some are doing better than the others, but on average, as stated by the chair, most of the countries are recovering well and would see growth restored to pre-COVID levels sooner than later, and perhaps by the end of this year. So I want to take this opportunity again to thank the Secretary General, the Secretariat, and the Chair for a very, very fruitful two-day meeting and excellent outcomes from that meeting. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Thank you, Minister. Mr. Teo?
Thank you, Honourable Prime Minister, and also to the Deputy Prime Minister of Fiji and the Secretary General. I echo the statement made that it's been a very fruitful and productive meeting. It's been held in the past 2 days to the excellent chairmanship of the Prime Minister from the Cook Islands. But it's also, it was in a very good spirit of discussion and sharing knowledge among the regions. Understanding the key issues as mentioned in the outcome statement that our region is facing. And I think the discussion and the outcome was really reflected. And one thing that came out as well is the inclusiveness of the discussions and also the parties involved. It is understood that the Minister of Finance, the economic ministers, they also have other players, the private sector, the CSOs and the finance ministries and others can work together. And that's the spirit of the meeting, that all the members, that they have to work together to solve the issues facing our region, not only at present, but also looking to the future as well. Thank you.
Vinaka Minister. I think now we invite any questions from the floor.
Thank you very much, Foreign Chair. We are going to an acknowledgement of a very short time we have. We're going to go with 3 rounds of 3 questions. There will be no follow-ups. We are asking colleagues from Fiji to have the first question. May you turn your mic on, have your question, and then turn your mic off. Thank you very much, and introduce yourselves as well. Thank you.
Thank you. Good evening, gentlemen, and congratulations for another successful Foreign Ministers meeting. My question is, you've mentioned about the Pacific Resilience Facility Fund. My question is on whether there are plans to invest in an independent financial institution that's created for the Pacific and owned by Pacific Islands Forum. Because I understand that the facility that you mentioned is looking into attracting donor funding. Thank you.
Yes, this is a Pacific construct to address the needs of Pacific Island countries that we feel are not being adequately met through current climate funding sources. So we have spent quite a bit of time on the redesign of this particular financing facility, and we hope to have contributions into this facility from development partners, but also from any philanthropic interests that may wish to demonstrate their commitment towards addressing climate concerns in the Pacific. Or this is one particular facility that we can assure them that funding from this will go towards Pacific Island countries. The idea behind this is to make access to financing by Pacific Island countries much less complex than what we are seeing now and what we are hearing from our Pacific Island countries when they do go through other channels of financing. So we're hopeful that with the financial rigor that will be applied, with the support and recognition of the likes of the World Bank in terms of the management of these particular funds, that we will then attract sufficient development finance or donor funding into this fund. And our initial target is to look at receiving up to $500 million. But my own thinking is that there is no reason why we cannot expect up to $1 billion into this particular fund to address the priority needs in the resilience and adaptation area of our Pacific Island countries.
Thank you very much, Forum Chair. We're going to go to Cook Islands Television and then swing back to Fiji Times. Thank you, Tiana.
The question regarding the banking situation. In the public seminar at USP yesterday, it was mentioned by this review about how, asking hard questions to the bank and sometimes not getting answers. What kind of questions has been posed to the banks this time around? What are the tough questions that have been asked, and with questions not getting answered, what would the way forward be? What needs to happen?
Thank you for that question. I think what we were referring to was that it was in the context of the fact that there are estimates which shows that between now and 2030, the Pacific as a whole would probably need close to about $10 billion to address the adaptation measures, the infrastructure needs of the Pacific Island countries. And as the chair said quite rightly, one of the reasons for this Pacific Resilient Facility is to ensure that there are new and innovative ways to mobilize more funding for the Pacific Island countries. One of the questions, the hard questions that we are asking is the commitment by the development partners, international organizations, our developed partners, the commitment of 100 billion. We are going to go into COP28 to talk about loss and damage funds. And essentially what we are saying is that we don't have much time in the Pacific. We need urgent attention, and therefore it is imperative that we ask hard questions about financing. And as you can see, as stated by the chair quite clearly, climate financing is one of the key issues that Pacific leaders, ministers have to deal with. And this particular facility is really a Pacific initiative. It's an innovative way to advance the agenda of sourcing additional funding for adaptation in particular.
Yeah. Yeah. And if I could add to that as well, Deputy Prime Minister, because the reference was to banks. Banks generally are not in the business of granting money, but they are in the business of lending. And so for us, if we are required to borrow money for climate initiatives, then our call has been always that the banks need to change their terms and conditions to allow that borrowing to be affordable to Pacific Island countries. For example, the impacts of climate change can take decades to manifest themselves, especially in terms of long-term climate impacts. The funding to address these concerns needs to be considered along the same time frames. So we've asked for terms of 40, 50 or more years at nominal costs of 1%. These are the types of ways that banks would need to change the way they do business, because right now we are not business as usual with the impacts of climate change affecting all of our countries.
Minister Brown, this is on the implementation of the resilient fund pool. Now, has member countries, as discussed, able to set up, or in the last 6 years by leaders, have they been able to draw fund from this, or let me rephrase, have countries been able to draw funds from the pool that they had initially set up prior to the redesigning of this funding, pool of funds rather?
Yes, where we are currently with this facility is the establishment of the facility. So when it was first proposed and the first designed 6 years ago, it was to have a facility in place that donors could put funding into. Unfortunately, COVID came along and halted things for a while, and it's only in the last 18 months now that we're starting to redesign certain aspects of it. So there is no funding in this pool other than the commitments that have been made by the US of $2 million to help stand up this particular facility, and also commitment by Australia for a further additional $2 to $3 million, again, to get this facility stood up. Certainly once it's completed and endorsed by Pacific leaders in November, then we would be ready to take this facility out to development partners, to donors, to be able to look at it as a good way of putting their funding into, knowing that it's going to be targeted to Pacific adaptation priorities.
Thank you. We're going to go to Tonga and then back to Fiji with Biman.
Finance Minister from Tonga, Liberal from Radio and Television Tonga. So just firstly, what is Tonga doing to address the issue of inflation in Tonga? And also, what is Tonga learning from this FEMM Economic Ministers Meeting 2023? Thank you.
Thank you very much. The inflation in Tonga, we are able to control. It has reached a peak of 14% in September, but it has gone down to about 6.6% in May, and the National Reserve Bank benchmark is 5%, and we are projecting to go into 2024 and beyond. We will meet that benchmark. So it is under control, and it's due to the monetary and also the fiscal policies adopted by the government. With this meeting, as mentioned by the Honourable Chairman and also the Deputy Prime Minister, the Secretary General, it really covers the key issues that really face our region, and that includes Tonga. Tonga is not also having issues with the corresponding banking, and also with the accessing climate finance, and also disaster risk. As you may be aware, that Tonga faced multiple disasters last year, but luckily we were able to, fortunately, with the assistance of our development partners, that give us the funding. But as mentioned by and discussed under the FEMM, there needs to be a facility for Pacific to exist. But it is also acknowledging the fact that the leaders of the Pacific and finance ministers have been able to build a confidence in our system, in our financial system, to be able to receive the money and be able to distribute, and to our citizens to use within this facility. Yeah. And that's the confidence we have in the financial system is reliable to be able to facilitate it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Minister. We are going to head back here to Fiji with Peter, and then across to the Solomon Islands, Robert, and back to Mironi from Fiji. Thank you, Peter.
Prime Minister, my question is directed to you. In response to your opening statement this week, there are numbers of regional frameworks, plans, and now the 2050 strategy. Some countries are concerned with so many regional plans, strategies, and frameworks but very less implementation and benefits flowing to member countries. There is some reference to the review of the regional architecture. What is this, and how will this help member countries with their commitments to the 2050 strategy?
Last year, the leaders adopted the 2050 strategy for the Blue Pacific continent. That really sets the blueprint for us and how we, as a region, now move forward to address issues around the prosperity of our countries, the welfare of our people, and the protection of our island environments from the threats of climate change. My job now as chair of the forum in this year is to look at the implementation plan for how we are going to achieve our 2050 strategy. So there are a number of initiatives that have already been provided by the Forum Secretariat team in that regard. And we will be, by the time of our forum meeting, leaders meeting in November, we hope to have a number of concrete implementation actions that we will be able to announce in November. What was the second part of your question again?
The reference to the regional architecture.
Oh, yes. Yes, in light again of us all emerging out of COVID, the need to be more efficient, more effective in our regional organizations, there's been a call again for a review of our regional architecture to try and make sure that it is now fit for purpose for Pacific Island countries. What it was when many of these organizational structures were in place a number of years ago may not be fit for purpose now. So it's always good to go back and have a review of how your organization is working. There are a number of things, new initiatives also that are currently under consideration and review. These, we hope, will feed into a much more effective, efficient regional organization to better address the needs of our member countries, but also to better implement the implementation plan to address or to meet our 2050 strategy.
Thank you, Lisa. My question is to first to the Chair of Prime Minister, the second part is to the Prime Minister. On the labor mobility, the strategy, to what extent do you consider new players like the Solomons will still have access to labor in comparison to other countries in the strategy? And second one to the detail, you talked about the visa-free movement. Is it only for the seasonal workers or for everybody else? Thank you.
Yes, in the meeting that we had, the representative of the Solomon Islands, representing the Minister of Finance, was able to indicate that the seasonal worker program that has been extended to Solomon Islands has proved to be very valuable to both workers that are in the scheme, but also to the country as a whole, not least because of the significant remittance payments that are coming back into the country from workers who are in this scheme. So we received in the report numbers of how many people are actually employed in the scheme from the Solomon Islands, quite a significant number, and certainly the view from the ministerial representative is that the Solomon Islands looks to this particular scheme as a benefit for workers and for the countries. So they'd like to see this scheme not just retained but expanded.
So the Forum Economic Ministers recognize the desire of some of the members for visa-free travel, and this is in the context of the desire for deep, meaningful regional integration. And when we talk about visa-free travel, what we are saying is essentially that movement of people, travel ease, will also support businesses, investments. For example, we talked about, how super funds, investment funds can move across the Pacific Island countries to promote, specific kinds of investments. And so visa-free travel is important if we want to see a truly integrated region and unity amongst the Pacific Island Forum members. So it is in this context that we have talked about, visa-free travel.
Good evening, Melanie from Fiji Television. I understand Fiji has been very vocal about losing skilled workers to the Pacific Labour Scheme. Is there plans to review the scheme so that it's a win-win situation for the region and Australia and New Zealand?
I think you're right. You've answered the question by saying that it is a win-win situation. Of course, as the chair quite rightly pointed out, with these schemes, there are always challenges about consequences of people leaving, where we lose skills. But on the other hand, we've seen in the case of Fiji a significant increase in the remittances. This year alone, we are projecting that remittances would reach close to 1.2 or 1.3 billion dollars. It also, of course, provides us with challenges for our own, skill requirement. It, in some ways, forces us to relook at our training programs, our technical and vocational programs, to ensure that we are able to produce enough skills. But at the same time, as you know, in Fiji and in other countries like the Cook Islands, we are also getting labor from outside of our own countries and sometimes from outside the region. And to facilitate some of those, as a government here in Fiji, we are looking at our making our immigration system more efficient, facilitating businesses which may need specific skills at a particular point in time because there is shortage. So it is an issue. Of course, the government in Fiji's case, we are already looking at appointing liaison officers. The Australia and New Zealand have committed that those who go and work there as part of the scheme would be given the same protection as those employed under Australian laws or New Zealand laws. So there is a lot of assurance that some of those issues that you pointed out would be dealt with, and the ministers were able to discuss that, and there is a common understanding that labour mobility is an issue. There are consequences of that, for both sending and receiving countries, but there is also recognition that it's a win-win situation. And of course, visa-free travel is part of the broader agenda for deeper and more meaningful regional integration amongst the Pacific Island countries.
Thank you very much, Deputy Prime Minister. Thank you very much. Nakapakalewo to our FEMM 2023 VIP panel.